image like no other, inspiring decades of research and debate. The Shroud of Turin, that's a piece of history, and it has an ongoing puzzle for science.
The Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth that's imprinted with what many believe is the actual image of Jesus after his crucifixion. Now, it's been debated for years, but the shroud is back in the headlines in a major way.
The Shroud of Turin. Why did scientists stay silent for 50 years? Picture this. In 1978, a team of 33 scientists from across the globe was granted unprecedented access to one of Christianity's most mysterious relics, the Shroud of Turin. For 5 intense days and nights, they examined it using the most advanced technology available at the time. And then, silence. Years passed, then decades. Why were some of their findings never fully released? And even today, more than 40 years later, why do many of those researchers still avoid speaking openly about what they discovered? In this video, we explore one of the most debated and intriguing scientific mysteries of the 20th century. The Shroud of Turin is more than just an ancient piece of fabric. It has become a crossroads where science and faith collide, where skeptics and believers debate, and where modern technology meets enduring mystery. And here's the most fascinating part. The more advanced our tools become, the more new questions seem to emerge. In this video, we'll explore 4 major ideas. First, what scientists actually uncovered in 1978 and why those discoveries reshaped how we view the shroud. Second, which results were allegedly hidden, downplayed, or misrepresented. Third, why the 1988 radiocarbon dating still sparks intense debate today. And finally, the modern breakthroughs that are forcing researchers to rethink everything they thought they knew. And before we finish, I'll share a strange detail first noticed by an Italian photographer in 1898. A detail that still defies scientific explanation and could completely transform how you see the shroud's true origin. The STURP project, the most ambitious study ever conducted. In October 1978, something happened in the city of Turin that many compare to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. But this time, it wasn't just archaeologists chasing history. Physicists, chemists, biologists, and even experts connected with NASA came together to investigate one of the world's greatest enigmas. The mission was called STURP, the Shroud of Turin Research Project. It became the first, and so far the only, large-scale scientific investigation ever conducted on the Shroud of Turin. To grasp the scale of it, imagine this. 33 scientists arrived in Turin carrying more than 2 tons of equipment, all dedicated to uncovering the truth behind a single ancient cloth. They brought in X-ray machines, spectrometers, and microscopes capable of 1,000 times magnification, along with ultraviolet and infrared cameras, tools you'd expect to find in the world's most advanced forensic laboratories. Altogether, the equipment was valued at more than $2.5 million, an enormous amount at the time. But here's the surprising part. The researchers were initially given just 96 hours of access, approved by Vatican City. That meant non-stop work. Scientists rotated in shifts, often sleeping only 3 or 4 hours a night. Project director John Jackson later recalled, "We were obsessed. No one wanted to waste a single minute. We knew we might never get this chance again." And he was right. After 1978, the shroud was never again made available for such full-scale scientific examination. The very first hours of testing created a wave of excitement. When chemist Raymond Rogers collected tiny surface samples from the fabric, he expected to detect traces of dye or pigment. After all, skeptics had long assumed the image on the Shroud of Turin was simply a clever medieval forgery crafted by a skilled artist. But what he found was shocking. No paint, no ink, and no binding agents of any kind. Even more puzzling, the image was incredibly shallow. It affected only the outermost fibers, penetrating just 200 to 600 nanometers into the cloth. To put that into perspective, a human hair is about 200 times thicker. Physicist John Heller later wrote in his memoirs, "We checked the data over and over again. It seemed impossible. No known painting method could create an image like that." And yet, the most astonishing discovery was still ahead. When image analysts working with NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory applied software originally designed to study spacecraft images to photos of the Shroud of Turin, they uncovered something extraordinary. The image on the cloth carried real three-dimensional information. Try scanning any painting or photograph with a 3D analyzer and you'll usually get a warped, flat result. But the shroud behaved differently. It produced a coherent 3D form of a human body. Project leader John Jackson described it this way: "It was like discovering a hologram hidden inside an ancient relic." The project's official photographer, Barry Schwartz, captured more than 5,000 images during the investigation. Years later, he reflected on the experience. He had arrived in Turin as a committed skeptic, convinced they would expose a clever fake. But what he saw through his camera lens, he said, completely changed his life. By the end of the 5th day, the team had gathered such an enormous amount of data that it took years to analyze. And that's when the story took an even more unexpected turn. Blood that shouldn't have been there, a biochemical mystery. In 1980, 2 years after the Turin investigation, the first startling reports began to surface. Piero Bayona, a forensic expert from the University of Turin, published a controversial paper claiming that the stains on the shroud were not paint at all, but real human blood. Even more surprising, he identified the blood type as AB, a rare group found in only about 3 to 5% of the global population. The reaction from the scientific world was immediate and intense. Many researchers were stunned. How could blood remain on a cloth for nearly 2,000 years? From a biochemical standpoint, it seemed impossible. Hemoglobin breaks down. Proteins degrade. Over time, real blood should fade into unrecognizable traces. But American scientists John Heller and Alan Adler pushed the investigation even further. Using microspectrophotometry and X-ray fluorescence, they didn't just support the presence of blood. They found unusually high levels of bilirubin, a compound associated with severe trauma and extreme physical stress. What made their findings even more striking was that Adler himself was Jewish and an agnostic. He had no personal motive to validate a Christian relic. As Heller later wrote, "We identified all the major components of blood: hemoglobin, albumin, immunoglobulins, but in a condition that shouldn't exist after centuries of natural decay." And then the story took another unexpected turn. When Heller and Adler tried to publish their full findings in the journal Nature, their submission was rejected. The reason given was simple and revealing: the topic was considered too controversial. The study was eventually published, but not in a major journal. Instead, it appeared in a lesser-known forensic science publication from Canada, receiving far less attention than it might have otherwise. Years later, an even more surprising discovery emerged. In 2017, Italian crystallographer Giulio Fanti analyzed microscopic fibers taken from the Shroud of Turin. He reported finding nanoparticles of creatinine and ferritin, substances that form in blood during extreme trauma and severe dehydration. Even more astonishing, these particles appeared to be fused into the linen fibers at an atomic level. Fanti suggested something extraordinary. It's as if some kind of energy event imprinted the biochemical state of the blood at the moment of death, he told reporters, but we still don't have the technology to reproduce anything like it. Forensic experts also joined the investigation. Working alongside chemists, Robert Bucklin, former chief medical examiner of Los Angeles County, analyzed the wound patterns and blood flows seen on the cloth. His conclusion was direct: the anatomical precision of the injuries, the direction of blood flow, and the presence of both pre- and post-mortem bleeding were all consistent with a real crucifixion. He even remarked that if the shroud were a fake, its creator would have needed knowledge of forensic science that didn't exist until the 20th century. Decades earlier, in the 1950s, French surgeon Pierre Barbet carried out grim experiments on cadavers to better understand crucifixion wounds. He discovered that nails would have to be driven through the wrists, not the palms, as traditional art often shows, because the hands alone couldn't support the body's weight. Remarkably, the wounds visible on the shroud appear exactly in the wrist area. But why didn't these explosive discoveries reach the wider public? Why were they known mostly by specialists and a handful of dedicated enthusiasts? Swiss forensic scientist Max Frey identified pollen grains from 58 different plant species on the Shroud of Turin. Even more striking, 45 of those plants grow only in Israel, and some are found exclusively around Jerusalem. Yet when Frey attempted to present his research at an international conference in 1981, his paper wasn't even added to the program. No clear explanation was ever given. At this point, a pattern begins to emerge. Again and again, when researchers uncovered findings that challenged the idea of a medieval forgery, their work was ignored, sidelined, or dismissed outright. But the biggest controversy was still ahead. The 1988 radiocarbon shock. Science or politics? On October 13, 1988, Anastasio Balestrero, the Archbishop of Turin, held a press conference meant to settle the debate once and for all. Radiocarbon tests carried out in 3 laboratories, Oxford, Arizona, and Zurich, had produced a clear conclusion. The cloth dated to somewhere between 1260 and 1390. To many, that meant only one thing: medieval origin. Case closed. Headlines exploded across the world. The Turin Shroud exposed. Skeptics celebrated. But the scientists who had actually studied the shroud up close were stunned and deeply frustrated. Let's take a closer look at how the dating was actually done. The original plan, drafted in 1985, was careful and thorough. 7 laboratories would take part, samples would be collected from multiple areas of the Shroud of Turin, and the tests would be conducted blind, so researchers wouldn't know what they were analyzing. But that's not what happened. In reality, only 3 labs were involved. All of them tested material taken from a single corner of the cloth, and there was no blind testing at all. The labs knew exactly what they were working on. Harry Gove, the inventor of the accelerator mass spectrometry technique used in the dating, was outraged. In his memoirs, he called it a serious breach of scientific standards, arguing that what should have been rigorous research had turned into a media event. And that was only the beginning. In 2005, chemist Raymond Rogers, a member of STURP, examined fibers taken from the same area used for the radiocarbon tests. What he found was startling. The threads from that corner were chemically different from fibers taken elsewhere on the cloth. They contained cotton, even though the main fabric is linen. They also showed traces of the dye alizarin and, most importantly, vanillin. Vanillin forms as linen in flax slowly breaks down over time. Yet, while fibers from the sample corner still had vanillin, samples from the center of the cloth had none at all. In simple terms, that suggests a major age difference, potentially over 1,000 years. Rogers summed it up bluntly in an interview. The labs hadn't dated the original cloth at all. They had dated a repaired section, a medieval patch sewn onto much older fabric. As he put it, it was like trying to determine the age of a car by testing only a brand new tire. The story took another twist when documents from the 16th century came to light. They revealed that in 1534, the Shroud of Turin was damaged during a fire in the chapel at Chambéry. The Poor Clare nuns later repaired the burned sections and reinforced the weakened edges. They used a technique known as invisible mending, a highly advanced form of restoration that can only be detected under a microscope. Further doubts emerged when Harry E. Gove's data was reviewed by University of Oxford statistician Harry Ween. He found significant statistical inconsistencies in the 1988 radiocarbon results. The variation between laboratories was too large for what should have been a uniform sample. His conclusion was blunt. There was a very high probability that the material tested wasn't homogeneous. This raises an obvious question. Why were these concerns largely ignored? Another perspective came from Harvard University researcher Dr. Thomas Phillips. He proposed that if a burst of neutron radiation had occurred, something some researchers believe could explain the shroud's image, it might have skewed the radiocarbon results, effectively making the cloth appear younger by more than 1,000 years. His paper, however, was rejected by Nature for being too speculative. Later, Michael Tite, editor of the journal Radiocarbon, reportedly acknowledged that there was intense pressure to settle the debate once and for all. Alternative explanations, he suggested, were not welcomed. Adding to the controversy, the laboratory that conducted the testing reportedly destroyed the remaining samples after publishing the results, making independent reanalysis impossible. One of the most striking criticisms came years later from Carlos Chagas, former head of Argentina's National Atomic Energy Commission. In 2013, he stated that if he had received the radiocarbon data without knowing what material it came from, he would have rejected it immediately due to clear signs of contamination. Taken together, these details only deepened the mystery and left many wondering whether the final word on the shroud has truly been spoken. The story of radiocarbon dating has become a classic example of how science can sometimes be influenced by politics, pressure, and bias. But technology never stands still, and in the 21st century, new tools have led to discoveries that are even more surprising. The digital revolution. What computers revealed. In 2002, something important happened that barely caught public attention. The Shroud of Turin underwent restoration. The 16th century patches and backing were removed, allowing scientists, for the first time in about 400 years, to examine and photograph the reverse side of the cloth. What they found was astonishing. The image visible on the front simply wasn't there on the back. It had vanished completely. Only the bloodstains had soaked through the fabric. This revealed something crucial. The mysterious image affects only the very outermost fibers of the linen, thinner than a human hair. Creating an image on fabric without it penetrating deeper than a fraction of a millimeter is extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, with conventional methods. But the real breakthrough came when digital imaging experts got involved. In 2010, researchers from ENEA, Italy's National Agency for New Technologies, Energy and Sustainable Development, attempted to recreate the shroud's image using advanced laser technology. Their goal was simple: see if modern science could replicate the effect. Project leader Paolo Di Lazzaro explained that they used extremely short bursts of ultraviolet light from an excimer laser, pulses lasting only billionths of a second. According to him, this was the only way they could alter flax fibers to resemble the coloration seen on the shroud. But there was a major obstacle. To create an image covering the surface area of a human body, researchers estimated it would require a burst of energy around 34 trillion watts. To put that into perspective, that's roughly comparable to the combined output of thousands of nuclear power plants, released in a single instant. Paolo Di Lazzaro openly acknowledged the limitation. He explained that while their team could reproduce similar effects on very small areas, scaling it up to a full human-sized image was beyond the reach of current technology. In other words, modern science could imitate the effect in miniature, but not replicate the original. Meanwhile, mathematicians from the University of Padua took a different approach. They created an ultra-high-resolution digital model of the Shroud of Turin, scanning every square centimetre at 4,800 dpi. Their analysis revealed something deeply puzzling. The image doesn't follow normal projection rules. Researcher Giulio Fanti explained that if a cloth had simply been draped over a body, distortions would be obvious. The ears would appear stretched, the nose flattened, and the proportions warped. But that's not what the shroud shows. Instead, the image looks almost as if the cloth remained flat, while the body was somehow projected onto it. Then, in 2018, French engineer Thierry Castex applied neural network analysis to the shroud's image. He trained artificial intelligence to recognize known image creation methods: painting, photography, thermal imprinting, and more. The result was unexpected. the AI couldn't classify the image at all. It didn't match any known technique. The neural network estimated only a 0.0003% chance that the image was created by human hands, Thierry Castex reportedly explained. For comparison, even the most convincing modern replicas are identified as artificial with at least an 85% probability. But the story doesn't end there. In 2021, Israeli researcher Avner Shimoni claimed an even more unusual finding. Using advanced quantum imaging techniques originally developed for satellite technology, he reported detecting patterns in the structure of the image that resembled quantum-level correlations. According to Shimoni, the data suggested signatures associated with extremely high-energy phenomena. He admitted the idea sounded almost like science fiction, but argued that the patterns were difficult to explain using conventional processes, something he loosely compared to a microscopic, ultra-intense energy event. Which raises an obvious question. If claims like these exist, why haven't they made global headlines? Why are they known mostly within small circles of specialists? Is it a deliberate silence, or simply scientific caution? In 2019, an incident added fuel to that debate. An international conference dedicated to the Shroud of Turin, scheduled to take place in Ankara, was suddenly cancelled just 2 days before it was set to begin. The official explanation cited technical issues. But one of the invited speakers, Andrew Silverman, later hinted that there might have been more behind the decision. Several key sponsors reportedly threatened to pull their funding if the conference went ahead, according to Andrew Silverman. He claimed they were uneasy about parts of the program that challenged the conclusions of the 1988 radiocarbon dating. And this wasn't an isolated case. A paper proposing new dating methods for the Shroud of Turin was allegedly accepted and then later rejected by the Journal of Archaeological Science, with the explanation simply being editorial policy changes. Robert Rucker, a former nuclear engineer from Los Alamos National Laboratory, has claimed to document dozens of instances where research on the Shroud struggled to get published or was withdrawn without clear reasons. In his view, the topic has become an unspoken taboo where studies that challenge a medieval origin are often dismissed as fringe. But why would this happen? Who, if anyone, benefits from keeping the mystery unresolved? Interestingly, resistance to new research seems to come from both sides. Skeptics worry that future discoveries might support authenticity. Some believers worry the opposite, that science could undermine faith. As a result, the Shroud has sometimes existed in a strange academic limbo, where serious study becomes difficult. Before his death in 2012, STURP photographer Barry Schwartz spoke openly about this tension. He said researchers had encountered findings they couldn't fully explain, but speaking publicly carried risks. In his words, scientists who voiced uncertainty could quickly be labelled biased or unscientific, discouraging open discussion. A historical example often cited is Yves Delage. In 1902, he presented a report on the Shroud to the French Academy of Sciences, arguing that the image did not appear to be man-made. Despite emphasizing that he was presenting scientific observations rather than religious claims, his conclusions were poorly received, and he faced strong criticism from colleagues. Whether one sees this as bias, caution, or controversy, the pattern shows how deeply the Shroud continues to divide opinion, even within the scientific world. More than a century later, the situation doesn't seem very different. John Jackson, who led STURP, later founded a research center in Colorado dedicated to studying the Shroud of Turin. But according to him, many universities have been reluctant to collaborate. Jackson has expressed frustration, saying the group is often treated like outsiders despite using standard scientific methods. Even the Catholic Church has taken a very cautious stance. The Vatican City has never formally declared the Shroud authentic, instead referring to it as an icon of the Passion of Christ. That careful wording reflects a delicate balance between faith and science. Former Shroud custodian Severino Poletto once explained the Church's position simply. Faith does not depend on physical artifacts. At the same time, he acknowledged that a definitive scientific conclusion, especially if negative, could deeply affect millions of believers. The result has been a kind of stalemate. Science can't easily ignore the Shroud's unresolved questions, yet open investigation often faces hesitation and controversy. According to some researchers, this has led to unpublished studies, overlooked data, and a long list of unanswered mysteries. And if that's true, then the most surprising discoveries may still lie ahead. Conclusion. So where does all of this leave us? We're looking at an image that doesn't seem to fit the Middle Ages. Reproducing something like it would likely require advanced modern technology. And even today, we still struggle to recreate it fully. We see blood that, by all expectations, shouldn't have survived for centuries, yet appears to contain markers associated with real trauma. We have radiocarbon dating that may have dated a repaired section rather than the original cloth. And we have a scientific world that remains divided, cautious, and often silent. But perhaps the strangest part is this. The more we learn about the Shroud of Turin using modern technology, the harder it becomes to explain. Reports of three-dimensional information, unusual chemical traces, and unexplained image properties only deepen the mystery. Now, back to something truly fascinating. In 1898, Italian photographer Secondo Pia took the first photograph of the Shroud. When he developed the negative, he was stunned. The photographic negative revealed a clear, lifelike positive image of a human face, far more detailed than what could be seen with the naked eye. Think about that for a moment. The image on the Shroud behaves like a photographic negative. And this was discovered centuries before photography even existed. Not only that, it's a negative that appears to contain depth and dimensional information. Even today, creating something identical is extremely difficult. So, some researchers have proposed a bold idea. What if the image formed through an unknown physical process? Something like a natural snapshot from antiquity, captured during an event we still don't understand. Physicist Paolo Di Lazzaro has suggested that the Shroud may reflect a phenomenon beyond current scientific explanation. In his view, either ancient peoples somehow produced effects far beyond our expectations, or the image represents a process that challenges our present understanding of physics. And that's what makes the Shroud so compelling. If it's a forgery, why can't we replicate it convincingly? If it's a natural object, why is there nothing else quite like it? And if it truly dates back to ancient Jerusalem, how did the image form in the first place? Maybe the real mystery isn't what we know about the Shroud, but what we still don't. For now, this long strip of linen continues to raise questions that science, history, and faith all struggle to answer. To some, it's an archaeological puzzle. To others, a symbol. To many, an unsolved enigma that pushes us to rethink what we believe is possible. And perhaps that's why it continues to fascinate the world. Whether you see it as a mystery, a relic, or simply an unanswered question, that final conclusion is yours to make.